This is the December 11th meeting of the New London Housing Commission. It's 2:30 in the afternoon on a foggy, rainy Wednesday, actually. And I hope everybody had a nice Thanksgiving. I will report I had my last turkey, cranberry, and stuffing sandwich for lunch today.
You're supposed to stop on
I was gonna say,
Monday
it was so good.
after Thanksgiving.
I knew somebody smart was gonna stop me on that. We froze a portion of the turkey.
All right.
And then brought it back out again, so it was still healthy and very much enjoyed. So, it's always a mark on my calendar in the last.
refrigerated?
So I hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving, how lucky we are and how grateful we should be. From a governance standpoint, we have a quorum. In fact, we have 5 of the 6 regular members. Amy is an alternate. Will you serve, Amy, if you would, please, as a commissioner? Thank you. Should we need to vote? I will also remind the commission that we still have an absence spot for a vice chair. And we can keep that on our radar. And also we have a commitment that every year we vote on a chairman. And so when we have a turn of the year coming up, not too far away, we will have a reevaluation of the chairman.
Usually after town meeting,
Oh, is it after town meeting?
usually.
Okay. Well, that can also incorporate a performance review if you like as well. So, constructive criticism, that's what we need. So that being said, we have procedurally, we have some minutes to review. With thanks to Adam and other town staff. So we will review first the July 31st, 2024 meeting minutes that were sent to you, and also are available copies here if you are missing them. I'll entertain a motion. On July 31st, motion been made.
Second.
Approved, been seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposition? None. Thank you. July 31st is approved. August 20th. Meeting was held in Whipple Hall, 5:30 our usual time, meeting minutes. Grant planning was resilience planning and design. Remember that meeting? A correction? Yes.
The top of the page is dated September 11th.
I think you just took the wrong one.
Oh, there's no
House.
last year. That's
Yep.
what I was looking at.
This is-
September
This is one here.
and July.
Perhaps we printed the wrong ones, or I put the wrong
July
ones
and
in.
Yet again.
They're all posted.
Okay, well, if we don't have reviewed copies, then we'll just suspend that then. It is the August 20th should be the date.
By there.
But there is one for September 11th also.
I think Peter wants a
And
correction. on
September
this,
11th,
so-
we're gonna get to later.
Oh,
I didn't have a chance to review it, so I wasn't gonna push that. Adam has done that along with,
Okay.
a
Sorry about
subsequent
the
meeting.
printing the wrong,
Not to worry, not to worry.
your spot.
Everybody is.
That's me.
Everybody
I'm the printer.
Printer.
else. reviewed it.
No, I think everybody's saying they have not reviewed it as so.
They've been on the website, but, so I guess if people have reviewed them there, but if they haven't, then we can just table it to the next.
What is your wish, please?
I haven't reviewed that. I don't.
Okay.
Sorry.
So August 20th, we will take up at our next meeting. As we will 2 others that are more recent. July 31st is approved. By vote. Good, we're getting caught up. Thank you very much. Adam and town staff was doing that. Wonderful. Next is a discussion led by Resilience Planning and Design, who are here on Zoom. There is a kind of a second part to our agenda that has Home logo on it. There were copies up there. Um, and they were also sent to you as well.
I printed my own, but that was.
That was it.
No.
I put a bunch of them out there.
Yeah, there's one more.
Welcome, Randy. Okay, Steve, Liz, you have the floor with your agenda. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Peter. I'm just going to ask that because you and Adam are there in the room with the commission and you have a better sense of who's there and if people are trying to get our attention, just help be our lifeline. If there's something that doesn't come across clearly and people want us to pause and explain it further, please help us know that. And if anyone has a comment that really needs to be shared at that moment, we will pause a few times. We have a lot that we want to move through, but we'll try to pause and make some space for some dialogue so that we can learn from the commission what you're thinking. But anyway you can get our attention would be appreciated. So part of what we wanted to do today before the year is up is actually look back at feedback received from the forum, talk a little bit about what to do with the bigger or more complex comments and questions that have come forward, or comments and questions that came forward in greater number in some cases. We want to also revisit a slightly updated version of the 5 key findings that I'll explain, because that's kind of part of our guiding light for this project. And then we want to give you an overview of what the phase 2 project looks like. So some of that was included in the materials Peter sent out. And then we want to even start getting you helping us with step 1, so that we have some to-dos over the next few weeks ahead of a January meeting, which will be discussed today. All this will conclude with a discussion about how we want to work on outreach to the public, based on the feedback from forum number 1 and keep people engaged looking towards forum number 2. So to start this, I thought it would be important, it helps me and hopefully it'll help some of you to kind of recap where we are now and where we're headed. And this was on one of the handouts as well. The 3 phases that you have received funding for from the HOP grant: discovery, visioning, and pathways. So we're at the tail end of discovery. It was a wide look at data and trends specific to New London and the region. It's helping us flag issues related to housing, some of which you were aware of, and it could quantify in some new ones. And it helped us engage the public at that successful forum where you got so many residents out. So discovery is kind of wrapping up and visioning is beginning. Visioning is really where we take the context that we now have together and look for opportunities within the regulations, and barriers within the regulations related to housing, and have some discussion about what could change that could alter the diversity of supply in the future, recognizing that just by adopting or revising regulations, there's no guarantee those units will be constructed. They would have to be both interest from the development community and interest from people who are going to rent or purchase those units over time. So the visioning phase is fun in a lot of ways. It's educational, as we'll start today looking at some different types of housing. What are they? And it'll help us review and understand your existing regulations in a new way, as they relate to housing. And that will get us ready after we do some engagement this spring. That will get us ready to then think about phase 3, which is pathways. What specific regulatory amendments or additions does there seem to be interest in? And then at the end of that, you can decide which of those get carried forward, or maybe in phases they get carried forward to voters. It doesn't mean that everything that gets drafted in this project has to be adopted. So I just wanted to give that recap. I'll pause for a second for any additions from you, Peter, or other members of the commission.
Comments? There are none. Very clear. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So feedback received. This is just a highlight slide. The majority of the feedback we received, according to Crystal, who actually had to do all the data input, was received at the forum. We only had about 10 people that used the online submission. So that was a little surprising. It's unusual, but I think it could be a sign of how successful you were at getting people out to the actual event. And they actually gave us quite a bit of feedback at the event. Since the event, and Peter and Adam, I'll pause in a minute if you want to provide any additional context for this. There were some questions that have been raised around the affordability analysis, the gap analysis. We heard that from the select board. We then got in contact with RKG Associates. They went into the data again and tried to clarify some things and have updated the report once more. So it's a final version. I'll pause there for a second if we need to talk about that any further.
I think the important thing to say at this point is that for purposes of what our study revealed, we understand enough about what those statistics show, but there's more that needs to be studied to relate it to things that are very important, such as affordability in our town and people who do not have capability of affording housing. The number that was studied and revealed was 34% of the community is cost burdened with respect to housing. And we need to understand that better as it relates to other issues. Housing is only one component, but food security, et cetera. And we're going to be looking into that a little bit more on that. That's kind of like an additional study that Steve, you and your team aren't involved in, but because it's not really housing related, but we will be looking into that further.
Excellent. The other update on feedback.
There's a question here. Yeah.
Is that 30-something% that you just mentioned?
Mhm.
The factor that had to include those people who are collecting Social Security, a portion of the population here in New London that collects Social Security as their income and have diverse other resources of income to afford in other words, if you're just taking their income, then that inflates these are people who can't live on a certain amount, right? So we want the town to understand what that percentage means.
Correct.
Is that what we're talking about?
That's essentially correct.
Okay.
Whenever we do data research, and I'm not an expert, but I know that every approach to data incorporates some assumptions of what they're measuring. And the source of data for that number was using what I'll call active income to determine affordability of housing. And active income for purposes of somebody who's retired and not working is interest and dividends and Social Security. And most people who are retired who are not on a pension have been carefully squirreling money away, a nest egg that over time they will use the principal as they need to in their retirement years. That calculation does not include asset wealth.
Correct.
It only includes active income. So
how does Steve, maybe even, how does that component affect the picture and message that we're sending to the town? In other words, are townsfolk going to be saying, wow, that's a lot. Who does that include? Like, where are those people? And then you have to say, oh, but it excludes this other component of the percentage of people who have income. So then you have to back it out. I mean, in other words, it's kind of goes down a rabbit hole, but not really.
well, it is a calculation based on assumptions and the data that's available for that particular query. I'm not sure we can parse it enough to say the number isn't 34, it's some other number, and we've been able to calculate it because you're limited by the way the data was collected.
Right.
So we're looking at different approaches to try and work around that figure to put more clarity to it. I'm not sure we can change it because it has limitations of the data.
No,
So we'll be looking at other ways of putting it in perspective to understand it better.
Thank you.
All right, so the third bullet here, which I thought was worth highlighting, we asked people to fill out a form on their way into the forum about where they're living now and whether or not they could see themselves living in that type of a unit or a different type of unit in the future. And I just wanted to highlight, it was interesting that about a quarter, 27% of the people that attended could see themselves living in a smaller style home. And I think we heard there were murmurs around the room when people realized that there weren't a bunch of smaller style homes in existence already in New London, and that it may take some time for those to be created. That was interesting to highlight. There were a lot of people who are also quite satisfied and anticipate being in their single family home they're in now into the future. And of course, that's wonderful. There's no issue with that at all. And then the last item before we go to the next two slides is we tried to collect, we have all these cards that Peter referred to in his email where people have asked a question or a comment. We have hundreds and hundreds of these cards, and they're your cards, and I'm happy to hand them over to you. Just don't make Adam read them all. That's my one request.
Or store them.
Or score them, right. So Crystal has gone through and done the best she could to summarize them, and then we've looked at her work. And what's interesting is we've taken a stab at putting into the top like 8 things that came across that seem like they're issues that people want answers to, or they're things that have to be addressed to some degree. We may have missed something. And so as you hear me go through these now, if you think of a question or a comment that you saw reflected in the longer summary we provided, or that you heard, let's talk about it now. Because what we'd like to do is settle on a list of these, top issues and questions, and actually write some responses in the next couple of days, and have Peter and Adam review those and be able to get it out to people so that they start to see responses to some of the questions that were being floated at the forum, and they can then maybe start to see a connection to the next phase of the project. So the first one is there were a lot of different ways that this was asked or commented on, but many participants questioned the state of municipal infrastructure and services. Is there enough water? How are we going to handle waste? Will the roads be able to handle additional homes? We're not talking about thousands of new homes. We might be talking about a couple hundred new homes of different types over the next couple of decades. But this is a question that comes up often, and it's a legitimate question. The examples we'll share with you today could all happen on wells and septic systems. So there are lots of things that still could be done in New London, even if there weren't water or sewage available. And my goal for this today is not to actually talk about all of these and come up with solutions. We just won't have time, but just to highlight them, and then I'll pause and you can comment on any of them. The second was questions were raised about whether New London has the land capacity for additional housing. The third was a concern about how more diverse or dense homes might change the town's character. The fourth one that we teased out was there was some opposition expressed specifically to townhouses, and that could be related to the earlier bullet about town character and maybe needing to see some better examples of how townhouses can be configured. But there was some support also expressed for cluster housing and for converting large single-family homes into multifamily or multiple unit structures. The second 4, there were some comments that New London has historically been unaffordable to first-time buyers and lower income residents. That may be true, but you are having to follow state law and make sure you're providing some reasonable opportunities. And we should address that. Is the focus on affordable housing driven by state mandates for all towns to provide workforce housing? To some degree, yes. I think your response to housing is maybe even beyond what the state's requiring. You seem to be quite self-aware and have a lot of other reasons you've expressed for wanting to look at your housing situation and think about the future. And I think we could add that to the response. The forum presentation appeared biased toward justifying the need for affordable housing. We did see that in quite a few comment sheets. And then lastly, there was some concern that workforce housing in apartments could worsen the already high property tax burden. This is an issue in phase 2 that we're going to be looking at. Mark Fougere, who you've worked with in the past and who's going to be coming back into this project for phase 2, is actually going to help us calculate the cost benefit and the cost for services for different types of units, single family, multifamily, today in New London. So you have a sense for if you were to have certain kinds of units be constructed in the future, whether or not they would pay their way, so to speak. So I'm going to pause there for a minute, Peter, and let's see if any of these resonate, if any of these should be just tossed out, or if we missed any.
I'll speak up since it's a little bit quiet for a minute. A couple of things that I took away from the statistics that you were using and looking at the cards, Steve, Liz, and Crystal too, thank you. Was that there seemed to be an overall recognition that diversity is needed. There isn't diversity. And of course, we have to figure out what diversity needs to be satisfied or improved. But there was a recognition of that, and that was good to see. I'll jump ahead to the point of the bias. And we do have to be careful because our goal is to let the statistics show us what we should be doing. But in all fairness, and not to be defensive, the statistics that we were seeing just in the presentation by RKG was pretty clear that that there is a diversity problem. And we had enough people who, overwhelming number, who said, yes, it does exist. And then there needs to be more definition of that. I also think you touched on it briefly. This is not as to the 5 or 10 questions we cover, but I think it is important to mention that if we do decide in the ultimate end of this project to propose some zoning revisions, whatever is done is not going to happen overnight. And that this diversity issue is a long range issue. And you pointed that out just in the beginning of this discussion today. So that's important. As to the items themselves, I think there was a recognition that I read from your summary that the size of the units or the housing style needs to be smaller, both from a standpoint of seniors and also younger families, that moving into a 2,900 or whatever size large house may be unaffordable in its own right and not necessary for a young family with 1 child or 2. Maybe that's where they might end up later on, but at least as a starter home, it's just too big. So size, I think, is something that we can touch on as well. The other points you've listed, I think, are valid and important in whatever format we decide, but I could envision it in sort of a Q&A, like what size is necessary, or what types should we look at, or do we have the land capacity, or what is the infrastructure impact, etc. You pose a question and then you provide an answer to meet that. So going through this list, I think it makes a lot of sense to include those, and I could envision something that's even 2 or 3 pages. The beauty of a Q&A format is that if you're reading it for the first time and trying to get information, you don't need to read the answer if you're not really interested in the topic that's proposed in the question, which is usually 1 sentence. So you pretty quickly go through material. I want to make sure that in our response to the community, we give them information that's digestible. And a Q&A is, I think, a good format, but I'm open to suggestions, of course. Those are my thoughts. Randy.
In our homework for today, you asked us to go through the takeaways and pick 5. And I wound up picking 3. The first is the questioning of participants about the state of the infrastructure. That seems to be, and maybe it's heightened by the water controversy now, and the reaction of the water precinct that they've asked for advice and never received it. That made sense to me. It made sense to me to be able to answer more clearly how more diversity and density might change the town's character. My own hunch is it wouldn't the order of magnitude that we're talking about wouldn't change town's character significantly, but I think it's a question that I've heard a lot of decibel level one. And then the whole relationship of workforce housing and apartments to high property taxes, and it sounds like we're already ready to pull that or tease that out. And those were the three that I took away as being something that need, and I did all this right after watching the tape of the meeting, so I was there virtually.
Very attentive. Thank you, Randy.
And well, thank you for all the work that's going on. And but those were the three that I think.
Anybody else? How's it feel to you? What do you think are the things that are going to be most important to respond now that we've looked at the replies and a summary of the cards, survey forms?
Do we have a definition for diversity?
Steve, did you hear that?
I'm sure there is a definition for diversity. We don't have one that we're ready to use. I think in our response, we need to explain what we've heard. We won't know what the solutions are yet when we respond to this, but talking about different types of units that are different sizes and meet different people's needs, I think is the direction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes, it does. But it can take a lot of different shapes and forms and, you know. I understand what diversity itself means, and I understand that we need different types of housing for different people. But I think the more we can explain what that really might mean, or what the picture might be, you know, because people don't always imagine things.
Sure.
You know, if you take a street in New London, then you know, say, okay, this is what could happen here, and this is what it could look like, and oh, well, that's not so bad. You know, I kind of pictured it differently, and I don't know how we would tackle that, but I had picked this, two of the three that you picked, only I kept the question in about the land capacity, because I think the top 2, 3, 4 are the ones that
Infrastructure land.
yeah. Infrastructure, land, and how the character, I think those are the things that people really, I think we can take the rest of it and address it in individual things or whatever, but I think those are really the top items that people want to talk about and want to understand and are concerned about.
Is it fair to say that we run with these 8 and keep those top 3 in their position as the first 3 to address, and we work up a draft this week so that we can get something out prior to the holidays? Does that work for people?
Yes.
Yes, you're getting nods.
All right, that's good. I like nods.
I would also add something that's sort of aside from establishing these priorities, but to start to think about the focus of what these comments and questions are. And it seems to me that what we're hearing in this lack of diversity is really focused on housing for seniors. We see that in the comments. Where am I going to go in 10 years? I'm going to need something smaller. That was in one comment specifically. Middle income, middle and lower or less expensive housing.
Yep.
Would be the second category, if you will. And the third is workforce, which I think we need to put a better definition to. If we use the statute definition, that's fine, but we need to be clear on what we mean. But those are really the 3 general categories of housing. I know in the future we'll be looking at specific types. Cluster, townhouse, you've seen the list that we can bandy about and decide on. But I don't want to lose focus on what I'm seeing in these comments. Now we didn't hear from a lot of middle and low income, but we are hearing that it's expensive.
Yeah.
The word cloud has that right in the middle.
Right.
So anyway,
And where do you put the first time home buyers that are totally squished out? I mean, so they're the workforce in the workforce, or, because that's another, almost another group that has been, having a hard time buying a house.
yes, and I remember buying our first house.
And
And I was
just-
working, fortunately, because that's the
Yeah.
only way to afford it. So it's kind of a blend of the two. It's workforce and less expensive.
But I was just reading something today saying we don't, if they can't buy a house, then they're gonna have to rent something. If they can find something to rent, but we don't wanna have ourselves be a nation of renters, because it's a whole different kind of thing. Owning a house and.
Building wealth through that.
Yeah, exactly. So the first time home buyers need to have some attention in there, some.
I think having all four of those groups identified is fine. There may be some overlap between them. There may be people that fit into multiple categories, but that's okay. It might help. It's part of what you were saying, Peter, about the stories, in your message to the commission. It might help us think about whose stories locally would be captivating.
Yep. Okay.
In the interest of time.
Hold on, one other
Yeah,
comment.
please.
Well, it's just, part of this. For some reason, I don't like using the word diversity. I prefer saying having a variety of housing options. To me is clearer, because I think diversity conjures up all sorts of other kinds of things that get in the way of what people are talking about. But when we're talking those four types of groups, and when we have talked about starter homes and other kinds of things, I think that's easier for people to understand. That's just me.
I think that's a really valid point, because I hear. My college freshman talking about diversity at her college. That's a whole different kind of diversity, and I like that. Specifically apply it to different types of housing for different needs, to meet different needs.
Yeah, diversity is kind of a softball question, right? It's a softball term. It means, where is there an imbalance? If you've got a group of things, where is something missing?
Yep.
And so that's a good suggestion.
But I think having options so that you have that middle housing, you have the starter homes,
Yep.
you have the smaller homes that seniors can downsize into, it's having options, what people are looking. And do we have sufficient options when people are looking in this town? No.
Maybe they need to use assortment.
I think variety is good. Was that Nancy that made the suggestion?
Varieties.
Yeah. Yes.
Variety of options, I think, a variety of options, I guess. is what we
Variety of
need.
options.
Yeah.
There we go.
We're saying the same thing, but trying to put better words to it. It's great.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. And I think it'll lead to another minor update of these 5 key findings. We can focus on the lack of variety in housing options. Are we good to proceed?
We are, yes, continue.
So we made some minor changes. I'll update number 1 to reflect variety instead of diversity. Number 3, vacancy rate was a little confusing to folks at the forum and after and some of the feedback. So we have reframed it a little bit. You might remember at the forum, we picked like 3 different data points to make some of these key findings understandable. And I think the fact that New London has a low inventory of homes for sale, that properties are selling quickly, all of that as part of the low vacancy rate of available units is probably more important to our conversation than the notable percentage of units that are vacant because they're primarily seasonal. So that's still a reality of yours. It doesn't have to change ever. It's been part of your history. It's just unique to New London and some other communities like you, but I don't think it's the point we want to lead with, because that definitely seemed to confuse people.
Yeah, it muddies the water for sure.
Yeah, and we don't want to do that. And then on number 5, there was a little bit, because of some of the gap analysis information and questions from the select board, the affordability challenges, we tried to refine that to focus on the fact that there aren't enough homes available for people, as Peter said, with low and moderate incomes, and that there may be some cost burden homeowners and renters in New London. what that number is and how the select board decides to get a better understanding of that number is kind of separate from this conversation. I think the takeaway, but we're looking at trends largely. If we found any cost burden homeowners and renters in New London, I would have been surprised. The fact that it was as high as it was means that we probably do have some issues with the data, as Amy and others have pointed out. But just taking away that there are some folks that are already here who are having a hard time in their own circumstance. And we just want to be aware of that. So with some changes, I think getting these 5 key findings out as part of this Q&A package, Peter, would be good, just so that it goes back out to the residents that participated and they are reminded of, like, these are at a minimum the 5 things that are informing your initiative going forward.
That will be part of our posting.
Yeah.
You do that all at once when we come up with a Q&A or whatever format we're gonna use?
I think so. And then we could put it all to the website when we put it out. When we send everything out, Liz and Crystal know how to do this. I don't. But when we send everything out to all the people that gave us their emails, we'll likely use MailChimp. And so they'll get it and they'll get linked to the website and to the materials so that they are thanked for participating, informed about what's available that's new, and given a hopefully a save the date for a spring session 2.
So I'm sorry, so just to clarify, so are you still working on the analysis of the affordability challenges piece?
Yes.
No,
Well, the burden, the cost burden is what we're
Right.
looking into further, but it's sort of as an accessory study that's going on. It's not gonna slow down the housing piece. We know enough about the housing
Right.
to continue.
But so have we then been able to or will we be able to respond to the selectmen soon?
We're working on it.
Okay, all right.
And I think there has been some response to the selectmen already.
Okay.
I think it was last Wednesday or Thursday that Steve got BB some information.
Okay.
Then, I mean, I think with this subset of data, there's always going to be some limitation to
Oh,
what
sure.
we can find out through it, whether there's people who have for whatever reason, their other costs in life are pretty low so that they can attribute more of their income
Yeah.
to their housing costs. So they're just spending more than the 30%. There's always going to be other scenarios that are in there. So I think we have to, in some ways, accept that we're not going to be able to answer all of the questions with it, but we can certainly go
Okay.
a little bit further.
Okay,
good. All right. So this is exciting. This is the start of phase 2. What I wanted to do is give you an overview of phase 2. We put in some timelines that we think will work because we're trying to keep this moving in a way that both is engaging to the public, but not overwhelming to all of you who are doing the actual work. And we'll get started on step 1 today before we conclude this meeting. So step 1, I think, is a nice way to start because we've been talking a lot about data and types of housing come up, but we may have different understandings of what those kinds of housing are. And you're all people of the world who have traveled and lived in other places and have your own ideas of what could work as well. And we want to engage you in this conversation. So we want to have a little brainstorming exercise about housing types. We've given away most of our best answers in the handout, so you already know what's coming. But what kind of housing units are out there that could be looked at as part of addressing the need for greater variety or gaps in supply that may exist within New London. We don't have to get to a final list. I want to know if there are things that are clearly missing or things that you never want to hear about again. That would be helpful. But then step 2 and 3, we're actually getting started on as soon as tomorrow with Mark. And that's actually an audit, so to speak. It's a review of your regulations, looking for the types of housing units that are currently allowed in the process for those to be allowed, which zoning districts, how they differentiate, and then any barriers that would exist today to the approval of a variety of units that maybe are missing. And so we need to go through this. We need to spare Adam from having to talk to us through the holidays, but in 2025, all bets are off, Adam, and we're going to track you down. Just because Adam has such an in-depth knowledge of your regulations, we want to make sure that our analysis, we haven't missed anything or misunderstood something. But we need to do the work on your behalf first. So we have stuff to show Adam and Peter and then all of you in January. So that's the next part. And if we can have images of types of units to be thinking about as we do a review of the regulations, that'll just make it that much more engaging. And this is fluid. This isn't like we go through these steps so we never look back at a previous step. These can be iterative back and forth.
Steve, let me just jump in quickly for clarity purposes. The Mark he's referring to is Mark Fougere, who you may remember did a lot of work in studying our zoning bylaws and made recommendations for the vote that occurred in March of 2023. So he already understands our zoning and will be looking at it again and helping with that piece of it. But, so it's helpful because he's already done a major part of his background work to get his feet on the ground. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we like doing these audits with him because sometimes he will find different things than Liz and I find, and we can have a little bit of back and forth jousting outside of your view and then come with some consensus to you. The other reason we like to include Mark is step 4 that I've already mentioned earlier, trying to get a sense of property tax implications and other revenue sources that relate to existing or proposed units by type, specific to New London. And Mark will look at your data and help us look at examples and get an understanding of that as soon as February. So we're looking at trying to bring you some new information that start to build a clearer and clearer picture of where there are issues or opportunities and where there's additional data that might help shine a light on how you could proceed. And then the last couple steps, this goes back a little bit to the concerns about character, which I think are valid. There are lots of different ways we can make in the regulations require that different types of units fit into the development pattern and even with the architecture. And we can show you examples here from within New Hampshire, both regulatory examples and constructed examples. And that might help, I think, as Marilyn was saying, to help people envision, what it might be like on a given street or in a given district, how these units might over time show up and blend into the community and maybe help us understand what not to do that could disrupt that character. And then step 6, we'll really try to look back to see if there are specific types of housing that we want to move forward with. We want to kind of create a profile for each of these. It could be a standalone page or front and back of a page. And this is something that Liz will be helping us with to explain what that kind of housing is, explain where it exists today and where it's allowed, or if it's not allowed, what the challenges are, and kind of use it as a way of pointing people to additional information, whether it's New Hampshire Housing Toolbox or case study examples, but really more of an educational piece that we can use to get out to folks to explain what a cottage court is or what a conservation subdivision is. And it doesn't need to just be single family homes. And we could show them Watson Woods in Exeter, New Hampshire, which is a great example. That single family duplex and quadplex units in a beautiful setting, a variety of people with different housing needs living together. And then step 7 would be to roll this out to the public again. Give them highlights from phase 1, but then show them what we've learned in phase 2 and probably engage them in a different format next time, maybe more a roundtable discussion format, but to really try to get their input and direction, both educate them on what we're looking at, what the options are, and also collect feedback from them about what fears or concerns still persist. I'll pause there for a second. If there are questions about this phase 2, I'm happy to answer them, or if there's discussion.
Thoughts? Randy?
How does phase 2 connect with town meeting?
Independent of town meeting, with this HOP grant, our schedule, our program really spans the town meeting that occurs in 2024. And the research and the study of phase 1 and that leads to phase 2, which is the visioning stage, and eventually to the pathway stage of trying to see how would we get to what we envision, would be occurring after town meeting 2025. And if there were anything to come out of it, it might be proposed for town meeting 2026.
does the visioning work want to connect with town meeting 2025?
That's a question. I had not envisioned, I did not thought there would be any connection whatsoever. The planning board does have some zoning proposals that they're working on, but I don't think that they, at this point, we're relating what we're doing.
No, I mean, that deadline's today, so we won't. So as far as, are you thinking, Randy, more capturing the audience of the people
That's right,
there?
it's building the audience.
Yeah,
Expanding the number of people who are thinking about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately the agenda of town meeting is so full with the warrant articles that you have to get through. And presuming that there's a police station debate on this town meeting, I'm not sure that we would have the time in that evening to add something along these lines. But I think it could be, if we are planning a early April rollout, it's the perfect time when you've got 400 people in the room to, instead of this time sending a postcard, you've got 400 people to remind them that they can come back in 3 weeks and participate in round 2.
What Adam's referring to is, we haven't discussed it yet, but we're tentatively setting April 5th as a possible date for the second forum we would engage in. And because that's when Colby Sawyer would be available, we've done that homework to find out. So it would be soon after town meeting.
Now,
And so how are we keeping people engaged and giving them a sense of progress and updated on whatever, I mean. April is so far away, and, yeah, and as someone said to me, December was almost over before it got here, but. It's so far away, you know, the 3-year, this has always sort of bugged me, this is such a, to keep people engaged. I think. I don't know, how are we gonna keep them engaged, even between now and April?
It's a good question. We had,
It's-
as a commission, discussed the idea of some storytelling sessions.
Mhm.
And the Community and Consequences has several movies, probably not 2 in one sitting, but we do one and then some storytelling, the way they did in the church
Mhm.
you referenced in one of our last meetings. So that's a way of keeping it alive, but your point's well taken.
It's gonna, there's just, people are doing so much and so busy and running around 110 different directions and, oh yeah, we went to that meeting, that was interesting. What next? What's gonna happen? Oh, there'll be a meeting in April. April? Oh, okay, you know, it just, and then the fact, the whole thing, it would be town meeting 2026, it's always bugged me, I mean, I sort of understand it, but just seems like. It's very slow progress.
It's not my usual sequence being entrepreneurial, but I think it's important. That's the way the grant was set up. And also
I understand
remember that the zoning we proposed in 2024 was resoundingly denied. And so we need to do our homework to come up with what we think the community wants.
Well, I understand us doing our homework.
Yeah.
3 years is still a long time.
Yeah.
Even just to keep this whole committee engaged, frankly, I mean, you know, it's a long time.
Yeah.
And how do we keep people thinking that this is moving forward? I mean, I don't know whether we have to do something in municipal matters once a month, and even that doesn't have as broad a reach as I'd like it to, but maybe we have to, you know, put something in the shop, or I don't know, I just think,
Or the Intertown.
or the Intertown, I guess, not everybody needs the Intertown. But it's
The-
the only thing we've got.
There is another idea that we're working on. I don't know if you've had a chance to ever listen to John and Maggie Randolph, who did the Harmony Homes project down in Dover, is it? Dover. I've heard it a couple of times. It's really well done.
It is well done.
And we're making some early strides of outreach to see if they'll come do a presentation to us. And that would be the kind of thing that would be really interesting. What that is, you may remember, it's a cottage cluster. They're small, 2-story cottage cluster that is primarily focused on the workforce for John and Maggie Randolph's construction company. But it's attractive. It receives zoning relief. It's high density. I believe it's 8 units per acre, if I'm not mistaken. So it's tight, but it's a clever design. It's their phase 2 is now under construction, maybe close to completion. So we could even possibly ask them for a tour.
Well, and many of those units could be starter homes, could be downsized homes for seniors. I mean, they fit the bill. I mean, it was a wonderful presentation. It's interesting. And the way they do it, it creates neighborhoods, which is a critical part to any of this, I think.
Community.
Particularly for seniors who are looking to downsize, because, you know, some seniors are gonna leave their big mansion and go to East Cupcake and have no neighbors around who can help them. That's ridiculous. And the only options are to go into a community where you pay for services, which not everyone can afford. So, I mean, I think it's worthwhile to have them come and do the presentation. I really do.
We're working on that.
Services connected to.
No, it's just a neighborhood, that's what I'm saying. Yes.
I'm gonna say,
I was just asking if that portion of those included services as well, some. But not,
those don't.
then you have to pay for it.
But their home ownership, they're small. I think they're, if I recall correctly, 640 square feet.
Yep.
But that includes a loft, which is on a steep stair, which required an architectural variance. So for seniors, that you'd have to modify the program a bit, but the concept of a
The
cottage
concept,
cluster could work for senior use.
Right.
Ownership.
And I think that's what we need to do then, is to do a series of something literally once a month. I mean, to just keep people engaged. I know that sounds terrible, but no, it doesn't all have to be so big and fancy and whatever. It can just be something up at the Baptist church, you know?
Yep, yep. I want to make sure we don't get in the way of the primary momentum we've got underneath the grant program, but it's absolutely to have things out there that we're thinking about. It's a chance for more exposure. Anybody else?
I'm in agreement with Marilyn. We really have to sort of bring the crowd along and address anything that isn't already addressed. So if people just been to this forum, then maybe some people who want to know what we know now in this meeting, what we have to tell, we have to sort of be somehow open.
Well, aren't our consultants doing a report out back to folks?
Yeah, I'm just saying that, you know, do folks know enough to go that if they don't get an email? Do we have other folks
I see.
who didn't attend, weren't there virtually, who are to Marilyn's point, saying, whatever happened to that housing thing?
So-
Where do we, yeah.
So maybe perhaps it warrants an article in the Intertown that condenses that and, you know, reports out what did happen. And that's part of the communication. I think it's important.
With a reprint in the shop. Just another group, another department.
Yeah, it's just the shopper is usually ads. I mean, not,
Yeah.
necessarily,
though.
not necessarily text. I'm thinking more, you know, text. And so whether it's,
So was I,
excuse me?
so was I.
Oh, okay, well,
But municipal matters.
yes.
would do
is-
that.
is-
I mean, you could
is
do the
text.
same thing that you do in Intertown in municipal matters.
Right.
Are there topics, I just mentioned the Harmony Homes section, what other topics do you think we could get involved in and portray, have speakers or either on our own or somebody else that would keep momentum but not put the primary focus off the rails?
Well, what's the other group that was mentioned earlier relative to, was it Stratum? But there was another housing configuration,
Steve, are you there?
Steve?
Yeah, I'm not sure which example. I mentioned something in Exeter. Was that what you were referring to, Watts Woods?
I don't know, what is that?
That was a conservation subdivision.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I think any alternatives that have been presented out there would be helpful, and actually anything, I think a number of the things that are in that Vermont report are interesting as well, in terms of people understanding different types of housing that can meet needs.
I would just say, don't steal our thunder for April, because that's a lot of
Okay,
what we
all
want to do at the forum, is
Sorry.
tell people what we learned from the audit and from the phase 2 process, and then show them a variety of different ways of doing these kinds of units and the resources available so that they can feel part of the decision making and feel like it's not stuff we've all just conjured up.
Yeah, agreed.
And I
Okay.
don't want to squash the conversation on outreach and marketing. I think everything you're all coming up with is fantastic. I'm almost wondering if we could create a little marketing subcommittee off to the side to help Peter and Adam and us get these things out.
Good idea.
I would suggest that you're not really stealing the thunder anyway. You're actually keeping the thunder on the horizon at least, because as Marilyn had pointed out, November to April is a pretty long quiet time. And we need to be reminding people that we're responding to what they've asked us about. I mean, we're basically responding to that cloud. And we need to remind that cloud is the topic that we have interest in. We're responding to our community, not necessarily advocating for any outcome at this point, but just responding to the questions and issues that are raised, and do that frequently. It's used to focus on marketing. It's about reminding them why we're talking to them, and continue delivering that message repeatedly.
I totally agree with you. When I referred to stealing our thunder, it was just about the kind of case study examples.
Sure.
Aside from, like, the Dover example that Peter talked about is great. I think these next couple of months are going to go really fast, and we have a lot of work to do that we want to bring before we bring it before the whole public again. So we need to stay focused on the tasks that are part of phase 2. If we could get some help with the other things that you're starting to brainstorm, communities of consequences, having the Dover folks or other folks out, I think you're all on the right path.
Anybody want to step up on the marketing subcommittee idea? I think that makes a lot of sense.
I would just echo Steve that, I want to make sure that the capacity of you as members to participate in the planning for the forum isn't diminished based on, other endeavors that have to happen between now and then. Obviously, we only have so much budget for the consultants, so I'm not sure that they can shoulder additional responsibilities. Frankly, I'm not sure I can really dedicate any more staff time to additional meetings between now and the forum. And Peter carries a lot of this on his shoulders. And I don't know if he wants, additional, that I think we have to be realistic. I think keeping people engaged is important. And if there are things that we can do digitally to, push out a short video or something of a storytelling that could be an effective way, pulling off an in-person event and bringing in speakers, it's not, even if it's not done to the level of Colby Sawyer with food and all of that, it's not insignificant. That I think we do have to be somewhat realistic in the resources we have to do those things between now and April, and do them well and not tire all of you out, so that when we have our actual planning meetings each month for the forum, we're all still able to be here and participate.
Well, let's keep it in mind, because the momentum is definitely important, and we have some focus. We had an amazing start, and I don't want to lose that either. So the point's well taken. I have just a couple of quick comments, Steve, on this phase 1, phase 2 piece that you have here. I don't want to get too far ahead, but I think it would be really helpful when we have something like this that talks about the draft list of housing unit types, is to have a 1-sentence description of what that means.
Yep.
Maybe 2, but 2 short sentences. I'm not looking for a full definition, but I think it'd be really helpful. And I think we ought to add 2 in particular. One of them is multifamily. You do have duplexes, but you don't have any quads. And quads could make some sense. We've seen them over on the snow development over opposite the hospital. I walked around there and walked through it. I'm that college, I'm sorry. I walked around it just to see the general configuration, and I think it works. It seems to be functionally well done and it's well maintained and it's what's needed in that location, in my humble opinion. So I think multifamily, or maybe you want to say quads. The other question is, would you have a type that would be converted single family? One of the statistics is that we, at least by bedroom count, our housing is larger than it needs to be in the future. And so how could you do that in a conversion? Maybe it's a housing type that doesn't work functionally because it's too expensive or it's so specific to each building. But I think we ought to have that on the list, unless you disagree.
Peter,
Yeah.
also, sorry. A while back, I think I emailed 2 pictures on Barrett Road.
Mhm.
I think that those are worth, if Steve doesn't have them, that we should make sure that he does, because those are existing properties. So on Barrett Road where the intersection is, the 4-way intersection, as you go, Pleasant,
Parkside.
Parkside, thank you.
I know.
You know what I'm, so if you're going on Barrett,
Little duplexes.
that little duplex, right, I mean. Nobody seems to object in town the way that looks. Fits into the neighborhood wonderfully. So then further down on the left is a little bit larger, but it could have been somebody's single residence home, but it's split one side and then the other, and it kind of has an arc for a driveway. Do you know what I'm?
I remember the pictures, yes. I think Adam was copied on that too. Those are examples of duplexes. So those would be photographs that we can use in the
You're
future.
laughing. What-
Oh, there's actually a third one between those two, but it's so camouflaged. I bet you don't know it's a duplex.
So photographs we will need eventually, but at least one sentence, I think, so that we have a
Tobin.
general idea what we're talking about.
Ed
And
Ortman and
eventually
Heidi
we will
Tobin.
need to come up with a good definition, what we're using as workforce housing. What does that mean?
Oh, there's one on front.
So those are my 2 comments.
I was only just bringing those up in conversation by way of also adding to the conversation for town people, that there are existing things. There already are existing things.
Right.
That we can use as examples of the variety of options. So that we are telling folks, these currently fit, kind of thing.
That's great. That's helpful. Thanks, Amy.
Okay, I think that's the 4th bullet. Steve, you still have the floor?
Yeah, so I like to be as responsive as possible to you, Peter. So the items you just requested, I have already incorporated in the PowerPoint. We must have had a mind meld at some point.
Oh,
So
there you go.
you'll be
Okay.
very happy, I hope, to see some of these things. And then whatever we've missed, we'll work in.
Awesome.
And this is kind of a first pass at looking at these types of units, and adding additional units is easy to do. And I think as we refine this over the next couple months and create these profiles, adding in specific examples you're all aware of from New London definitely makes it stronger. To say, actually, there's an example of this, of a quad or of a townhouse or whatever. And it doesn't mean we can't show other really great examples that you also like. So there's a variety of them here. I'm just going to run through them a slide each. If you could hold your applause and questions to the end, and then I'll pause and show you all the pictures again, and we can have a conversation. Does that make sense?
Let her rip.
All right. I'm still trying to get Adam to the post office in Vermont on time.
Yes.
All right. So cottage courts. The example in Dover can be talked about as a cottage court. They're basically a grouping of small houses around a shared space, maybe public and maybe private. They can be as few as 5, as are shown here in the graphic at the bottom. They can be much more. Cottage courts can actually include a combination of units. They don't have to be small single-family houses only. There are some examples where there's a quad or 4 row houses at the end of the shared space. So they're highly flexible depending on the regulations. But cottage courts appeal to a number of the types of folks that were listed in those 4 populations of people that Peter mentioned. Duplexes. So the duplexes that Amy was just talking about sound like standard examples of like side-by-side duplexes. The one Adam talked about sounds a little more stealthy, as are these examples, but it's a single building that has two separate living units. They each have their own entrance, kitchen, bathroom, living space. And this is just to show you that they can also be stacked one on top of the other, or one in front or behind the other. So you might have a single family home located next to a duplex, but they look largely the same architecturally. And duplexes being allowed in greater number of units is a trend right now in New Hampshire. Other states are requiring duplexes to be allowed everywhere. So that may be something that comes our way at some point in New Hampshire. Townhouses, although there was some pushback, we could try to get a little bit more feedback from folks about what their dislike of townhouses may be. The picture on the top right are some new units in Portsmouth. And the one at the bottom is from someplace I don't know. But just to show you a variety of ways to have units that have a shared wall. They can often be 2, 3, even 4 stories high. And they do often provide some kind of parking or covered storage area as well. They appeal to certain folks, and they can be in their own development as they are. I believe there's some townhouse units not too far from the town office in New London. Is that correct?
Are
Or
you
am I-
thinking, well, I'm not sure.
Yeah, maybe they're not technically townhouses.
The new units across the street are not, they're flats.
Okay, all right. So this is something we can look at, and we could look at where would be appropriate if they were desirable. Conservation subdivision, as we mentioned, it's really development where from the beginning we're looking at preserving a portion of the land as open space, as conservation land, and trying to cluster or concentrate the units closer together, reduce the amount of infrastructure. This is a really popular tool in some communities. I don't know if New London has ever had a conservation subdivision, Adam. But this is something we can show you examples of from around New Hampshire. Again, it doesn't have to just be for single family homes. It could be for smaller developments than the one pictured here, and it could include a variety of different types of units if you wanted it to, depending on where it was in town. Senior housing, which we've heard of. This is an example from Amherst, New Hampshire. Often includes independent living units, may include assisted living or memory care or other skilled nursing, but it seemed to be something that people are interested in. Accessory dwelling units, you can see how we buried this further down the list. I know this is a complex one for New London, but allowing for a secondary dwelling unit that provides living option for one or more people. I like this. This image actually is from AARP, and it shows the combination of detached, interior, a lower level, like a walkout basement, above the garage, or a garage conversion, just to show there are a variety of ways these can be incorporated into the development pattern. Backlot development or flag lots. I think this came up with Mark Fougere when he worked with you all, and it wasn't pursued, and maybe it won't be pursued this time either. It would be probably something we'd want to look at just in certain zones for now. We're working with the town of Jaffrey, which has a backlot provision, but all lots have to be at least 12 acres. So they're fairly large, kind of forested backlots that they're allowing this narrow access to get to. And conversion of single family units, that Peter mentioned, this could allow up to 4 units without sprinkling the building. And this could allow units to increase potentially without increasing lot size. So that's something we want to look at pros and cons of. But this would allow for that large existing home to be broken up into a couple of units over time beyond just an accessory dwelling unit. And then the last example, which was featured in the Vermont document that was mentioned a moment ago, was this concept of big house, little house, back house, barn. This is something that Jaffrey, New Hampshire is also looking at, and it's a way to accommodate 3 or 4 unit structures in a different form than just a traditional boxy quad or townhouses or some of the other things we might picture. It's interesting. We're seeing interest in a lot of village settings for this. but this might be something that could be incentivized as well. So this was just to give you kind of a smattering of, oh, look, we already used variety. Thoughts on the variety of homes that could be allowed, encouraged within New London over time. And I'll pause there and see if there are any you never want to hear about again, or if there are some that we're still missing.
Steve, I'll just provide context on the flag lot.
Please.
Our discussion there was with flag lots under our workforce housing overlay district. And so as I recall, the concern was that we would have private homeowners essentially becoming the workforce housing developer, and they would be responsible for all of the reporting for the income and the making sure that that back lot, the flag lot, is maintained as affordable by the definition of the workforce housing over, I think it was a 30-year period that we were talking about. And so it wasn't necessarily the opposition to that style in general. It was is this really realistic that, you know, average property owner is going to be able to follow through with that over a 30-year period?
Makes sense.
Any other thoughts, questions?
So your example of senior housing is, I think you need to differentiate that it's senior housing with services. As you kind of described it, which would mean that some entity has to come in and manage it and run it and whatever. And I don't think that's necessarily what every senior is looking for. But it is an option, and I do think there is a need for additional options.
Do you have another example of a senior housing example without services that comes
Well,
to mind?
I think it falls into a number of these others, you know, the
Yeah.
cottages, anything that is smaller in terms of downsizing. The cluster cottage model, I think, is a great one because, again, it usually is built around a neighborhood.
Right.
And it's the neighborhood that's important in terms of people helping each other out. And ideally, that it's not just limited to seniors, so that you have mixed, you know, young families as well as seniors, so that it really is a neighborhood. Anyways.
And I would just add that there's a couple of examples in the Upper Valley of senior living communities that don't provide services. One being in New London, Lion Brook. I think at times we've been able to get one meal a day if they have a chef in the community, but there's not like assisted living services provided. And then the other, which is very popular in the Upper Valley, is Quill Hollow in West Lebanon, where there are not provided services, but it's a senior living community. There's an array of market value and some subsidized units all in one development. And there's detached townhouse units, and then there's apartment style units as well.
Oh, neat.
Yep.
Thank you, Adam.
Any other thoughts?
Just one other thought, I think it's the third picture that you showed. It's the one on. No, go back,
This one?
right there.
Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong, Nancy, I remember there was a concern that we don't want that sort of, like that top picture looks like just blocks of housing. And that, I think, we're intuiting that the people who live here, that's the look they don't want. It looks
That's
just,
been expressed several times.
Yeah.
yes,
When that's come up, yeah.
right? So,
And I think that was one of the oppositions to the proposal that Continuum had made over on the Bewley project, that it looks somewhat similar to that.
so, and in other words, that top picture is the picture that people get in their minds when they think of workforce housing. They think that we're just gonna throw up this box and that's what it's gonna look like.
You'd probably be surprised to know how much those townhouses are going for in Portsmouth. I don't think they're workforce housing.
No, I'm sure it's not. I agree with you. I'm just letting you know that we
Yeah.
have people who have a visual, and that's how it's twofold, right? You have to have a great visual, And you have to also show them that the visual that they have, you have to clarify what the visual is that you're showing them if it looks like this.
It could also be a matter of design. You're talking about a single line of a facade that has a number of ground floor entries to it, but if it were a little different design, broken up, set back and staggered, or with a different shape and arc, or maybe 2 and 2 and 2. Townhouses don't all have to be connected in one building with common walls between each one. They can be 2 at a time and have views and lower rise and different entrances that don't face the same direction. So to Amy's point, I think we need to think about how's a different
A
picture.
different picture,
Yeah.
I agree.
And it's all perception, and just a little trivial point. One time when I was working with inner city kids from Springfield, Mass, took them to Amherst, Mass, to a community like that, and they said, gee, they have projects here. So it's all in perception.
Because that's the way projects had traditionally been built.
I think the feedback is really valuable. So the design details being required in order to do something like a townhouse is easy to address in the regulations. And we can show other examples.
I don't know. I'm not sure if this is the conversation when it would come into play too, but I think in some way talking about which one of these design styles is actually economically feasible. Working through the Twin Pines process with or the Long Meadow Commons process with Twin Pines. It was an interesting glimpse into what control they really have over the design and the style of the building and the parameters of needing a project to pencil out. And so the division and just setting back the not having the uniform foundation squared off with a single entrance, all of those things add costs to the project that I think we would all prefer the visual look and probably prefer the feel of living there to be a little different, even if it was us living there. The reality may be that those things may not be possible and still have the project be financially feasible.
Mhm.
So I think if we could tie in some level of understanding with these variety of options, which ones are actually reasonable that they could be built and feasible.
I think we can do that, Adam, and on a couple other housing related projects and working with Mark Fougere because he represents developers as well. He's gotten some of that feedback. And so for Bedford and a couple of others who have decided to pursue townhouses and design concerns that have been expressed here were expressed there. He had some pointers and we were able to work him into the regs. So we can have him go over that with us all.
I think also that we're not, what we have to offer to build on and what we already have existing is very different than a Portsmouth or a Bedford or anything. And I think I agree 100% about the townhouses. I would take those out of there, only or style them differently somehow, because it depends on where we find these pieces of land. You may be able to do a really cute cottage thing in one, but we're not going to have a place where you can do a whole stretch of townhouses and that sort of thing. So it's a little different from different places.
Just piggyback on that, Marilyn. What do you guys, what is, as a realtor and as a town planner, what do you call Fenwood? What does that fit into?
Condominium apartments.
They're condominium apartments, but they are one
So
building.
there's two parts of Fenwood first. So I think there's,
I'm talking about the one I,
which is
which is the building.
the building. Yep.
Yeah.
So
So I mean, they're apartment size condominiums. And they're in a great location and they've got garages either in them or out. And I don't know what else I would call them.
Do you know what are you familiar with that, Steve? Do I need to take a picture?
No, a picture would be helpful.
Okay.
it's single building of individual apartment style condos.
Is it garden style? They have a central hall or are they exterior
And
entrances?
Central hall and elevator, right?
central hall, elevator.
So that's a garden.
Interior
Interior,
garages.
they have a dining room with a kitchen.
Common
In
space.
each unit.
Those are common spaces.
Yeah.
No, those are common spaces.
Right. Each unit has a fully functioning
Each
dwelling.
unit has their own.
Yep.
Apartment.
Yep. If that's of interest, we can add garden style apartments. Usually people that towns that don't like townhouses really don't like garden style apartments. That's the only reason we didn't
I would call
include
it
it.
something else then.
Yeah,
I mean,
I mean, I think we have both that portion of Fenwood, the front portion of Fenwood is a cluster subdivision. That really looks just like a conservation subdivision, and I actually wonder if our cluster subdivision regulations are really the same as a conservation subdivision, but we can have that conversation at some point. And then Lionbrook is very similar in
Yeah.
layout to the
Layout.
Yeah,
Fenwood
what would
portion.
you call it?
but the.
Apartment style condominiums, I
the
think is
fence would
perfect.
leading up to the building is freestanding homes, which would not be affordable, even for seniors downsizing. They're too large for downsizing and they don't.
Depending on what you're downsizing
Well,
from,
okay,
right? Everyone
alright.
has it's all relative.
Yes, everybody draws the line different.
You're all set?
Yeah, I sent it. Okay.
Okay, we need to keep moving here. Thank you. Steve, any wrap-up?
The last thing would just be to touch back on the two biggest things we need to move forward on. Emailing the participants, which we've talked about, and we'll start working on with you all tomorrow. And then working on this regulatory audit to see where these things are even allowed today, and where there may be barriers, so we can come back to you with a more complete picture. And we'll start building additional profiles for the other types of units and the clarified units that you have given us so far. So this was super productive considering we're on Zoom, and I really thank you all.
I'll say very productive. One other simple change I would ask, on your step 6 on
Yep.
page 2, it says confirm which additional housing unit types that should be permitted. And I think we should say could be permitted.
That's fine. Yep.
Well, it's subtle, but we don't know what should be, and even at that point, we may not know what should be. That's for the voters to decide.
Fair enough.
I never know when I can jump in with questions and comments.
Hold on, let me just get to a stopping point here. Any
The
other?
only other thing, Peter, was do you want to talk about the date of the January meeting?
Yes, we're moving on to that. Randy?
In the email, are we gonna ask the recipients to suggest other people who ought to be hearing about our work?
We can suggest they share the webpage and if people express interest. It's a good idea.
How would we do that? I'm sorry, I missed that.
I'll work on it. We'll put together a
Whether
message.
People who should be hearing about what we're doing, give us their names and contact
How do we get that information?
it goes in the email.
Oh, an email, right? Yes, of
That's
course.
for referrals.
Got it, referrals. Thank you. Sorry, I'm kind of thick. Anybody else? Just quickly, the planning as the next steps, as I suggested, we had tentatively set April 5th as a Saturday for forum number 2. Following a notion that it allows younger families and generations to attend better. It's not just an evening meeting. We know how important that is. And so put that on your calendars, if you will. We do have the use of Weider Hall for a morning meeting on April 5th, just tentatively. Public comment quickly, please.
Quickly, when I can. I'm not sure where to start. So, I mean, you're talking about all these options, and I guess I'm somewhat, I should say, I'm a Shepsing resident, so. But of course, do you think people don't know that they have these options? They have,
I think we know.
by right, you've got ability to have an attached ADU. Is even the zoning recently approved a detached ADU. And we have by right duplexes. So, I mean, a lot of these things you're discussing as if it's not known by people. Is that what all perceiving?
Yes.
Yes.
What we're suggesting is that when you're approaching solutions for what some of the facts are showing, you want to make sure that the definitions are clear and what the range of possibilities are, and everybody's fully informed. We don't want misinformation or partial information.
Was my opinion, I think people know they have these options. Just choose not to have an attached ADU. They choose not to change the house to a duplex.
Okay,
That's my opinion.
got it.
Also, I'm not sure how to say, so at the last meeting, I talked about how the fact that some of the data was questioned. Like the data, the square footage of residents, the way he derived it, it factors in, unfinished areas of houses, and everybody looked at me as if I'm crazy, but did anybody even thought to check to see that I was correct?
Yeah, I've been spending some time, Adam has as well, trying to get to the root of that question. It's actually a fairly deep question. There is some merit to it. What percentage of a difference that makes? It's not, it's fairly small. And it's a very technical question. We've been pretty much straight out on bigger issues, but it's not to be forgotten.
Okay.
So,
And then, I mean, there's honestly other data. I think it would be best if, all the data could be a little scrutinized. The fact that the comparison is with Merrimack, which includes Concord, which totally skews the numbers. Somehow people will disagree last time. There's other charts that I think could be questionable. I think when people start being able to question some of the data, then they may question it. Despite
well, and it does get to the point also that we can spend an inordinate amount of time refining numbers to incredible accuracy, which is satisfying to a certain extent. But it might be a distraction from the fact that the broader issue still remains. You may get a more accurate number, but it still makes the problem the same. And so we do want to focus on accuracy and truth and good facts. But we also want to keep in mind the big picture, which when you talk about the size, for example, of a house, we know that we have more bedrooms in an average house in the town than we need. So whether that's a 10% difference in square footage, because there's been a portion of the unfinished space that's been included, or a 5% or a 15%, it's not entirely a driving force for the whole argument. So I have your email and giving some thought and continue to study it. You and I can have a conversation further on that.
and also you have this mechanism to receive comments. But I thought, it doesn't look like if somebody actually asks a question that people get a response. I think it would be helpful if you want community engagement to be able to respond to questions that people submit.
That's what we're working on, is getting responses out to the questions.
Okay.
Questions and comments. We had over 100 people there with lots of cards, and we're trying to categorize them to incorporate the questions, not specifically to each one, or we'll spend years doing that. But if there's something that doesn't seem to be answered, then we're happy to have a conversation, an additional conversation.
Okay, I'm not sure what time period, there's many weeks that I've seen electronic questions asked that somehow don't get response.
We're working on it. Thank you, Rich.
But as far as time period, that's the whole beginning of this presentation. Steve was saying they'd be working on that in the next week to get that out. So, right,
Yeah.
Steve?
We're working on it.
That's correct.
I also,
As far as other comments submitted to the feedback form, we can't respond if we don't have the person's contact information. So some people have made things largely anonymous.
There's only one identified with by the individual, as far as I know.
Correct. Yep.
so
We're working on it.
I'm talking about ones that have emails responsive. So you have that information.
We do. Thank you.
And I did, I guess with all this discussion about diversity in housing that you had again today, I know if you don't call it, I have great concerns about that's could be misused. And to me, it's so clear. The issue isn't diversity in housing, it's affordable housing. So yet you could possibly say single family houses tend to be more expensive, so you should look at the other diverse options. I can easily see, it's too easy to punch holes in a lot of this diversity in housing as a goal, but that makes no sense to me.
I'm missing your point entirely,
I-
Rich. I'm sorry. Can you go back and start from square one and explain yourself?
So I think it becomes very clear if you peel the onion slightly that the problem that we have, and it's a legitimate problem, is affordable. But to say the problem is diversity housing just doesn't make sense. It's affordability housing. I'm not sure if those cluster cottages could be really inexpensive. Those look like there could be single family homes. That could potentially skew the numbers to be making, giving more higher percentage of single family homes in this town. They would be a great addition, but that doesn't add to our diversity. Diversity isn't the goal. The goal is to get more affordable housing.
Okay, I think you heard the conversation before, that diversity refers to an imbalance.
Why-
If you have a diverse population, perfectly diverse population, it is imbalance. You have all the different parts or types or representation of your types in that group. If there's a lack of diversity, it means that one or more of those types of whether it's people or buildings or what have you is missing. And so diversity refers to when you don't have diversity, it means something is missing. And what I hear you saying is affordability is one of those diverse types that's missing. And you heard that discussed today. And we have affordability is what we call less expensive housing, I use that term, is one of the types that we think needs to be the focus.
So-
So I don't understand your point, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you can have all types of affordable housing. It could be apartments.
That's
it
what
could
we're
be-
saying.
That's what we're saying.
Right, but the goal isn't diversity, the goal is affordability.
No one's saying that the goal is diversity.
Okay, well,
No, you,
everybody keeps bringing it up.
no, we were bringing it up by way of letting Steve know that as we disseminate the information, using the term diversity wasn't the term we wanted to use. It was part of several bullet points that was feedback and overall takeaways from the forum. So diversity is what came from the forum folks that attended. Am I correct?
And I do think that there's a portion of our population reading the comments that came in that night that truly they can afford whatever option they need for their retirement home, but the option doesn't exist. And so it's not necessarily that the small unit be affordable for them. It just needs to exist for them, period, and that there's just not enough inventory for it. I mean, we saw a lot of cards coming in that reference retirement options. And I think for a lot of those people, they have the means, whatever cost that may be, it just doesn't exist here.
We're talking about there being a variety of housing. We're not just talking about affordable housing, but that's a part of it too. But it's a variety. We do not have a wide enough variety of housing in our community for the people that would like to live here. And yes, we should have a strong portion of that be affordable to people so we can encourage them to stay and everything, but it's a variety of housing that we need too, not just, we're not gonna make super expensive in the varieties, but with the options there were a whole bunch of different kinds.
I think it would benefit to specifically what varieties are you thinking, is it because we don't have enough tiny homes? Right, but when you look at varieties, so it's, if there are a specific type that there's demand for, there should be data behind that, to say there's demand for this certain type of home.
Excuse me, I think that's what we're trying to accomplish. I think what we're trying to do here is to get from the community, and you're a part of it certainly, what types of housing they're looking for. And so the proposal or the presentation we saw today showed a variety of different types of housing, some of which might be classified as affordable, lowercase a. But some of which it's just different from what we're looking at today. So that to Marilyn's point, there is something here for someone to choose, even if they do want to spend what we might not normally consider to be an affordable purchase price. So that's exactly what we're trying to do.
Rich, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to cut this off because we're running out of time, and your point's well taken. And I think we heard you loud and clear, and we're working on it. Thank you very much. we are pressed for time. The update on housing. Nothing new.
Nothing to report.
Yeah. We've seen that there's negotiations going on between Twin Pines and the water precinct with respect to the claim at the Housing Appeals Board. I know of nothing, there's no new news on that. That's obviously private negotiation. And I know of nothing new with respect to the continuing project either. Any update on that?
No.
No, okay. Next meeting,
Important meetings, right?
I'm sorry.
Important meeting on Friday. We're doing it.
There is not a public meeting on
It's
Friday.
not a public,
No public.
It's
there is a meeting.
Yes,
and
not for us to
Not
comment
for
on.
us to participate.
Thank you. I'm not aware of that. Next meeting, I was going to propose January 21st, which is a Tuesday. There are a lot of meetings going on and budget meeting and a lot of other things. Time I was proposing 5:30. I know that doesn't work terrifically for Neil. How does the 2:30 timeframe work?
If it was earlier, there's potential, but unfortunately Tuesdays are always zoning board and planning board for me. So they all.
On that day, it's not on the calendar.
That's a zoning board week, so until we get an application, it's not on the calendar, but the application deadline isn't until the 31st of this month. So
Okay. I should have checked with you
Tuesdays
first.
in general just should be avoided.
All right, well, Wednesday is booked on all the venues, so we'll have to
I
do it.
think we could do afternoon again if a 2:30 worked. It's just the evenings will.
Okay, just two,
the 2:30 to 3:30, 3:45 works better than
it does work better,
till 4 or 4:30.
okay? Does 2:30 work?
It's not gonna always work. You know, every day, but
21st.
21st,
what kind of day was that?
Tuesday.
Tuesday, what was that?
great. Pencil it in, please. Location is probably here, but we will, I'll get it out to you quickly because you'll be getting emails, et cetera, as Steve and his team put stuff forward. Any other comments, questions, new business? Stellar. Motion to adjourn,
So moved.
so move, second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, thanks very much. Good meeting.